What does President Clinton, Herman Miller, Max Dupree, Peter Senge, prison warden, whole country vision and values program all have in common? The answer is my next guest on the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast, Michele Hunt. And I'm absolutely delighted to have Michele with us. Let's go.
Hi folks, welcome to the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast by Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter. In this podcast, Gary shares everything about servant leadership, service leadership, authentic leadership, how to create high performance cultures, service excellence and life balance. Here's your host, Gary Ryan.
Welcome, Michele. This is an absolute honour to have you on the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. How are you?
Oh, I'm great. Thank you. And it's my pleasure to be here to have this conversation with you, Gary.
Yeah,
By
this
the
has
way,
been
I love your book.
This has been a long time. I think I've mentioned to you all three of my books. You get referenced directly because of the influence you've had on my life since a recording I saw of you. And you were talking at the Centre for Servant Leadership, I believe, in the year 2000 in that speech.
Wow.
Yeah. And I know you talk a lot about your dream maker parents, and part of the story around values that really struck me at the time, Michele, was when you were talking about cleaning your teeth and having to look in the mirror with your father standing in the doorway in his uniform. And you used to have to look yourself in the eye. Can you share with the audience what you used to have to say out loud? I think it was seven times in a row.
Yeah, the context is we were stationed in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. My father was an Air Force military career man. And you can imagine way back then what the South was like. And so every day when my brothers and I would set off for school, the kids would lock their arms and sing tick-tock, the game is locked. And I'm going to use the word, no niggers can play, so that you can feel the impact of it. And they would sing that, as we go to school. And then we'd have to face tremendous, just ridiculous, people driving by, calling us nigger, because we were the first blacks to have housing on military bases, because my dad put on USO shows, so he was, So his solution was to give us a positive vision of ourselves. So every morning he'd take us in the bathroom individually, and I'd have to say, I'm healthy, I'm happy, I'm beautiful, I'm intelligent, I'm loving, I'm loved, and I'm wise 7 times.
Yeah.
Yes, and we thought he was nuts, but we programmed ourselves so that stuff didn't impact us. It bounced off of us because we had this vision of ourselves that was so compelling.
And I think around about that time, maybe you were 8 or 9 years of age, and you were auditioning for the school play in the gymnasium, and you're sitting on the bleachers, and you weren't getting the roles that you wanted, and all of a sudden that they chose you for a role that was atypical based on your race.
Yeah.
And I remember you shared how, 1 second you're really excited because, yes, I think I'm in the play. And then when they showed you what that role was and how racist it really was, but the action you took as that young girl was like, I remember you saying, this is not a place for me and I'm out of here. And you literally left the school.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. My mother is the one that Daddy gave us the vision for ourselves, but my mother had a strong belief in personal responsibility. And so we held that value. So when the teacher said, come down and practice this part, I'm coming down the bleachers and I'm saying, to myself, I'm healthy, I'm happy, I'm beautiful, I'm intelligent, I'm loving, I'm loved, and I'm wise. And because initially I was devastated, you can imagine, I was embarrassed, I was angry. But by the time, you're right, by the time I got down to the bottom, to her and the gymnasium floor, it was all gone. I was healthy, happy, beautiful, intelligent, loving, and wise. And I just walked out of the gym, walked past the principal, out of the school, walked home and sat on my porch and waited for my parents to come home. And it was beautiful. Yeah. It was liberating.
Oh, absolutely. And you shared off air before we got started that you've been working effectively as a transformational catalyst for vision and values, and how really one of your first major roles, when you were one of the first female wardens in a male prison, and you created some programs where you had the staff and the psychologists and the prisoners and yourself working together on brand new programs, catalysing and changing lives. You mentioned just off air that just was unbelievably impactful for you and really helped you with the path that then took you on. Do you want to share a little bit more about that, please?
Oh yeah, that was, I would say, life changing. It was a metamorphosis for me, because I held these beliefs, but I had never tried to put them in practice, especially But so we put teams together that were comprised of the inmates, the prison custody staff, which would be guards and stuff, the treatment staff, which would be teachers, psychologists, medical folks. And we mixed them up and put them in teams, and they had to work as peers. But the first thing we did is create the vision. We said, what do we want these programs to look like? And that was the first question to all the teams. And what do we want it to feel like? And so we ended up co-creating a shared vision, because every team, which was, remember, quite diverse, mixed up, came up with their version, and then we ended up with a common vision of what we wanted. Ended up that we had the best arts and performing arts program a phenomenal sports program, intramurals. In fact, the local cities came into the prison. We were part of the greater intramurals to play our teams.
Yes.
We had cross-country ski clinics in the yard, and we were investigated by the press because they thought they're using taxpayers' money. And we also had 157 community volunteers, and they brought in the equipment and stuff. So it was life-changing. Yeah, and I saw what can happen. And when you think about these inmates who come from terrible environments, not my dream maker parents, and they not only rose to the occasion, I mean, they came up with the best ideas because, they were participating in the designs that affected them. They came up with the prison was way, way out in the boonies. And so most of the big cities where most of the population was, couldn't get visitors. So they came up with a visitor program. Every single inmate had their own personal friend program. I mean, stuff like that. Wow. It was just amazing. We had it. Yep. I mean, we had a college program. It was just great. It was great. And so, yeah, it changed my life. And it showed me what's possible when you mobilize people around a compelling vision that matters to them. And then you liberate them to participate in realizing that vision, making that dream come true.
When you were working in that prison, you started with the questions of what will success look like and what will it feel like. I suspect you've got some deeper type questions that you actually use. And would you still use those questions today?
They absolutely, the essence of the questions have not changed. I use some terms that will allow people to tap into their imagination and their heart. So I get more descriptive today. I'll say, for instance, what's your highest aspiration for your picture of success? What would it look like? And so they dive into that and peel the onion skin back and co-create that. And then what are the core values? How do you want to feel? What are your deepest desires for how you want this journey to feel? And that is your core values. And in fact, I'd say about 20 years ago, I can't believe these references of mine because I still feel 35 years old. About 20 years ago, I actually started flipping it. I would start with the values
Mm.
because then the vision would grow out of what matters to you most. And so the question is, what matters to you most on your journey? I don't compartmentalize the first question. I don't say at work or at home, what are your core values? Because those need to be aligned no
Mm.
matter where you are for it to be authentic. And so we ask that question, and then they build their core values and come to shared agreement on, and so that's a process on what those 5 to 7 core values might
Mm.
be. And then from that, what's your highest aspiration? But don't forget they're rooted in and born out of what matters to you most.
Mm.
So then go ahead.
That's a significant shift, even though it's really still the same questions, but changing that order to values first is a significant lesson and learning for anyone watching this that wants to work on with their teams. And if for whatever reason you have to do it yourself, Michelle's just giving us the exact questions to be asking and
Absolutely.
to start the process.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was a big aha for me. And the results accelerated and deepened tremendously, because you don't have to fight as much showing or demonstrating that you're authentically starting this process when your first question is what matters to you most.
Mm.
I don't remember what philosopher says. I don't care what you say until I know that you care.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Bob Chapman and the Barry Waymiller Group.
Mm-mm.
So Bob Chapman's the CEO of the Barry Waymiller Group, and they effectively own the machinery that makes the packaging for anything we would buy off a supermarket shelf. So anything you would get up from Walmart's in those packages, they don't put what's in the package, but Barry Waymiller Group own the machinery that makes the packaging. He
Gotcha.
wrote a book in 2017 called Everybody Matters, and
Mm-hmm.
growth of his business. He was a typical accountant, inherited his business from his father in 1975 when his father unfortunately suddenly passed away. And for 22 years ran the business like an accountant, and he got it from a business that was not making any money to making a reasonable profit by 1997, Michelle. And unfortunately, though, even though it was doing about $200 million at the time, about 1,200 employees, he was at a friend's child's wedding. So he'd known this child for most of her life, and she was getting married and walking down the aisle. And he had this thought, this epiphany, if you like, that, gee, I hope that the groom cares for my friend's child as much as I know my friend and his wife have cared for her, raising her. And like within a split second, it was as if he had the higher being, tap him on the shoulder. And he
Yeah.
had this question asking himself, which was every one of those 1,200 employees, irrespective of how old they were, was someone's child.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that when they'd come to work for him, the parents had equally probably wished and hoped that he cared for them, just like he was thinking about with this bride.
Right.
His immediate answer was, no, we don't care for them
Yeah.
anywhere near to that level. And in that moment, he decided that's going to change. We are going to learn as leaders how to truly care for our people. And since then, it's now over $4 billion business, 12,000 employees, all of the financials you can imagine. They absolutely killed their marketplace. But the book Everybody Matters is a must on everyone's shelf, which explains that journey. And Simon Sinek, when he went there in 2012,
Mhm.
actually said, Michelle, when he got there, I'm so pleased to see this organization because it is evidence that what I've been preaching is true and works.
Yeah.
You know?
I've never seen it not work unless the leadership gets scared and fear creeps in, and because at some point you have to loosen controls. Um, but that's the only time, and that's been rare.
Yes. And that's something I wanted to get your thoughts on, Michelle, because interestingly, from my research and work over time, it seems that it's quite possible in private enterprise when the owners are on board and willing to be vulnerable and willing to let go. in organizations that aren't structured that way, it seems that it works for a period of time, but then something changes with who ends up being in control and leading it, or the market changes and something changes and it flips back to the very old industrial age view of the world that seems to still be far stronger than people like you and I would like it to be. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree wholeheartedly. The You can go on for decades and then have a leadership change, and depending on, it's very fragile. And so the leaders have to be totally invested. And it doesn't have to be a private company, because Herman Miller was a public company. You know, we were a Fortune 300 company and led that way for 30 years. However, to be honest with you, when Max Dupree retired and the leadership changed, we encountered the same thing, because we had been, by using this process, we had become one of the best companies in America to work for, and we had, I'm not in America, in the world to work for, Fortunes. The best company for women, the best company for working mothers, the most admired company in the world by Fortune, the best managed company in the world by the Bertelsmann Foundation, most environmentally responsible, because our vision was, we want to be a reference point for excellence, comma, by any measure. And that the people did that because we do. I mean, when Max Dupree, our leader, said, you know, we were failing, by the way. That was the catalyst to that. We were failing. We had our heads in the sand, and the world had changed on us, and everybody was knocking our products off, and cheaper, better, faster. And we simply had become arrogant, the seven of us on the leadership team. So in his wisdom, he said, let's engage the entire organization in co-creating a vision. And we went through the process that I defined. And we had we bounced it through leadership worldwide, and Max said, not enough, but bounce it to every team in the organization worldwide. And that's when they said, no, we want to be a reference point for excellence, comma, by any measure. And we're like, oh. And we had this cross world team that was the communication team. And they said, so our barometer will be, metaphor of a red Herman Miller truck and an 8-year-old child. So that 8-year-old child, when that 8-year-old child sees a red Herman Miller truck, they get a feeling of quality and excellence. Now, when you translate that meant we couldn't spew stuff in the environment. We couldn't mistreat their parents at work. We couldn't send their parents traveling without ability to come home on the weekends and attend the soccer games. You know, just it was amazing. And it was an 18-month process, and that we went from failing to all those accolades that I shared with you, including for the next 2 years, 2 stock splits in 3 years. So it was by any measure. But the financial, as you know, was the consequence of everything else we did.
And I remember you were hired as the vice president for people, not the HR general manager. You were the vice president for people. And one of my degrees is in human resource management, right? And I was actually doing that degree when I first came across that work with you. Okay. Now, equally, a couple of years earlier, I'd been exposed to Dee Hock's work on the birth of the chaotic age, where he's quote about we're not human resources.
Right.
And it was in doing that degree, I really was convinced 100% human beings are not resources, and we should eliminate that phraseology, human resources, human assets, and human capital, from our language completely.
Absolutely.
Now, this is controversial, what I'm about to say, but I believe that one of the reasons why we keep flipping back to that industrial age thinking is because people who work in HR do not know where that term even came from. And it came from Henry Ford and Frederick Winslow Taylor and the scientific management method when they said that human beings are part of the machinery. And as a result, the term human resources was born. We're not part of the machinery because we're human beings, right? But we still have these massive HR industries. We have these HR organizations who refuse to change their name. And because they call it HR, an acronym, it still means human resources. And while our language reflects our mental models, and while we have language that continues to label human beings as resources, assets, and capital, I'm sorry, folks, no matter how nice a program you think you're doing, it's still going to flip back when pressure comes to you just a number.
Well, I agree. I'm totally aligned with that. In fact, I'll go a step further. It'll never authentically reach its potential, because if I know I'm being referred to as a resource versus a living, breathing human being, the heart of the organization, actually, you don't have an organization without people. Well, at least not yet. But yeah, so words do matter, Gary. Words create worlds. Language carries with it culture and meaning. And so, yes, absolutely. The words you use in leadership truly matter. And that's why you have to do that with care. And understanding the impact and the connotation of words on the human spirit is important.
You know, and you've done that work with words with the whole country. That is a massive undertaking to be a transformational catalyst for a whole country, and specifically with Aruba to actually come up with a national set of values and vision. I mean, what an honor.
I remember I'm just a catalyst. So they did it. They co-created that. I mean, I brought a process, but boy, they were ready to go. I mean, and it wasn't easy, but oh my God, that was an amazing journey. They very much wanted to co-create a national identity, because they had gotten their technical or official independence from the Dutch, I think in 74 or 76, but they still had the colonized kind of identity and mentality. And yet this is a country made up of 52 nationalities. So, I mean, you have Japanese, you have Indians, it's because it was small and it grew quickly. It's an immigration country. And so for instance, their language was papiamento. And that was English, Spanish, Dutch, and some spatterings of other cultures or languages. And one of the things that came out of that process was they made their language, papiamento, the official language, we're talking about language again, of the island country. Because before that, everyone had called it the bastard language, that was just, yeah. And so, I mean, there's a lot of things they did, but they invited every citizen to participate in co-creating the vision. And they had a steering team, which was cross-sector. It had a couple of people from Parliament, from education, from infrastructure organizations, from tourism, represented the whole nation. And they met together on a regular basis. It broke down a couple of times because everybody was bringing their own agenda. But fortunately, the superintendent of schools came up with the idea, let's put the children in the center. And so when we started asking the question, what is the vision in 5 years? It was with the children in mind, because they had to live into the future. And then they rolled that out. They sent an invitation, Gary, to every citizen home. What is your vision for Aruba? And they had a little story that talked about the kids too, but for Aruba 2005. So this was 2000. Um, Amazing, absolutely amazing. And they, when you go on a journey like that, once you get that vision and solidified, things start happening. It's not like you wait down the road before you see results. Things just start popping up. For instance, like every hotel, almost they started having daycare centers so that their people, wouldn't have the heartache and the financial challenges they did with daycare.
Yes.
Uh, they changed some laws because they were attracting the kind of tourists who were polluting their environment. And so they said, no, we're in charge of our environment. And so they have one of the themes of the vision was about their flora and fauna. I mean, it's just, and then they even had one on spiritual development, which was the last one, the last point. So yes, I've seen what people would call miracles happen, and it's not miracles. It's just people are extraordinary, and they're extraordinary, and yet we've inherited these structures and these systems and these rules that are not made for living, breathing human beings. And if you're smart, even if you have to learn, shift your heart a little bit, but if you're just a smart business person, you need to create an environment that enables people to contribute their gifts towards something that matters to them. And if you have everybody contributing their ideas, you're going to blow the socks off of the market.
Yes.
And over and over again, we did that. Not just everywhere I've seen.
Yeah.
This company called SRA that we worked with 10 years. They stayed in the top companies to work for, and I just met with the president actually 2 weeks ago, and that one was forever sustainable. By the way,
Yes.
they got so successful that they went public and made everybody rich because they had profit sharing, which was part of the transformation. Your people sharing the risk and the rewards of the business. And then they were sold to General Dynamics bought them. It was a win. So this stuff works, but the key is alignment. You can't just come up with vision and values.
Yes.
It's aligning your strategic goals, your systems, your processes, your structures, your recognition and reward systems, but most important, your leadership decisions and behavior. And when those get aligned, it's panacea almost.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. And we had people running to work.
And we can see the truth in your eyes, Michele, as your eyes sparkle, as I can see you, recalling the numerous environments you've been in where you've seen it actually working. And as we said, it produces all of the financial controllers' results that they want get produced by this part of the world. And yet we still honestly see it's so rare. And we still have globally 78% of people to some degree more disengaged than engaged with their workplace.
But I think the reason that they're right now is it's growing, the disengagement, because people are changing. That's why you're asking about, are you still engaged? Yeah, I mean, the demand is great right now because all bets are off. We had COVID and people went home and had the opportunity to reflect and started asking some serious questions like, what matters to me most? How do I want to live the rest of my life? Where do I want to contribute my energy and time and my gifts? And so that, along with or juxtaposition with the fact that you can't get people don't want to work in big organizations anymore. They don't want, there's a shortage. There's a supply and demand issue as well. To get the best and the brightest, You can't do it the old way. So things have fundamentally changed. And so people are looking for not just quality of life, they're looking for meaning in work, and they're not compartmentalizing anymore. Because when you sat home and you're on Zoom, you didn't have the luxury of compartmentalizing. And so you realized how, wow, yeah, this could be better. We don't have to have these artificial structures that harm people. We can have these enabling kind of fluid structures that like vision, values, and alignment.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people realize it's really useful. And I think the pandemic helped people start to ask some of these big questions of themselves, as you've just articulated, Michele. But for most people, they've not been educated in actually how to create a vision for themselves. And then what do you do after you got your vision to work out all the stuff in between that you highlighted also before, which is the hard stuff, which is actually
Right.
why I wrote this book, because this book is the step-by-step process to help people be able to articulate what a vision looks like for themselves, what their values are, understand their mental models, all of that terminology, but then get very clear about the steps that they have to take. And because I think it's both ways, I do, from my experience, think a lot of people have had these realizations, Michele, but they're still sitting and waiting for their organization to be the catalyst for the change. And that bit has to absolutely happen. But I think it's both. I think the individuals have got to step up and be responsible for themselves and get real clarity about, well, what are my talents and passions, and what is the intersection of that, and what does that mean for maybe where I could be working, and be much more proactive. Certainly don't go quit your job, folks, because you still probably got a mortgage and kids to feed and education to pay, etc. But start this journey. But equally, organizations have got to equally start being more vision and value based, and actually being true to that with the way that they operate. I mean, the contradictions that I see with so many clients when I go in and work with them, unfortunately, you would have seen it and still do, no doubt, where they're saying one thing and the leaders are completely doing something else, is just still, it's mind boggling how obvious it's a contradiction, and yet it's still happening.
Well, I don't even think 90% of the time it's intentional, but leaders have not, this is not an automatic thing that you get through osmosis. So it's leaders have not, they have to change their mental model, and the way before you change anything, you have to change the way you think about how things should be, because organizations were built off of the erroneous assumptions, like people can't be trusted, people are lazy. There's one right answer, as Peter Senge says it, and the teacher or the boss has it. All of those things are untrue, and so making that shift that's why I do my work with the leadership team first. And people get it. I mean, there are ways there are processes to get them to think about those things, and then at least to get ready to engage in a process of changing I don't even use change anymore, evolving their organization is probably a more appropriate term, because nobody knew how to do it any differently before. So, it's an evolutionary process. People have changed I don't care what you say, in all of the devastation we're seeing, there's something I see, and I still travel nonstop around the world. I see it. There is a pattern, and there is an awakening in people, and you can call it consciousness, or you can whatever word you want to call. People are questioning, making those important questions about who they want to be and how they want to live and who they want to follow. It's not so much who you pick to lead; it's who they pick to follow.
And with a lot of countries like mine, it's become extremely expensive to live, and we're not on our own here in Australia. And so there's equally that economic pressure, and one of the challenges with that problem is that the minute you fall behind financially, the rate at which you get further behind is exponential. And so that brutal reality for people is also part of the awakening, because and we've got to do something about enabling people to be able to earn the money that they actually need just to be here, let alone up here. And all of those factors are important. Now, I have to mention Peter Drucker, because obviously so many people are aware of Peter's work and the influence that he's had on leadership. And you were unbelievably fortunate to have a very close relationship with Peter for a very long time. What would you say would be a key message he would have today if he was around to be able to articulate it, Michele, from your knowledge of him?
He was Max Dupree's mentor, and Max Dupree was my mentor. And so the entire leadership team had access to Peter Drucker, and he would always say the same thing. Why are you guys here in the boardroom trying to figure out what to do? Ask the people. They know what to do. I mean, he would just boil it down to that. Ask the people. Engage the people. Now, he had, a lot of his books are philosophical and all of that, but that's what it really boiled down to.
Yeah, because an interesting challenge we've got with some of the larger organizations here, that they've set a lot of very clear targets on, say, diversity measures, women, race, those sorts of things. When I'm working on the front line with the frontline workers who are representative of those groups, they actually don't like the fact that quotas have been set.
Yeah.
On the floor don't like that. And there's and one of the main reasons is their concern around merit.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about the minorities and women themselves?
Minority groups, women, those sorts of representations. And just, I can't name the organization, but even just literally in the past week, I've had representatives of the minority group saying to me, I don't like the fact that we've got these quotas set, because I'm concerned about the level of merit that people are having coming in, and their desire to work is because of the fact that it's easier to get the job rather than the actual job itself. And that's causing problems with the quality of the work that's happening. And I'm just interested in your perspective on that, given the amazing career you've had over time and what you've seen, certainly from the importance, because we certainly have to, on the one hand, we've got to be proactive.
Mm-hmm.
Yet on the other hand, listening to the people on the front line, they're saying we know change needs to happen, but to actually have a specific quota is the wrong way to go about it, is what they're saying.
Way back when we had quotas, we don't basically have quotas anymore, but way back when that was the thing, we heard the same thing. And in fact, the first job I was brought into at Herman Miller was over equal employment opportunity specialist. Even though I had that big job in the criminal justice system, the private sector didn't value the public sector experience. So I came in as an individual contributor with a program, and then navigated my way up to the leadership team in 2 years. But one of the things so we didn't really do targets. We instead did values. We want Herman Miller to look like the communities that we live in and we sell to. And so if you get away from and the assumption that, and we had it's the assumption that if you target minorities and women, you're going to get less competent people is crazy, because there are so many phenomenally competent people who are women and who are people of color, and they just haven't been able to get into the glass, to break the glass ceiling. So we ended up, for instance, the first female officer, of course, and on the top management team. Obviously, I was the first Black everything at Herman Miller way back then. But by the time we left, we had 3 Black male vice presidents, the female management number went up to 43%. And that's because it was embedded in our core values. And you don't just do targets, you do have to be proactive, but you talk about your values. It had to be excellence. So you don't compromise excellence to get diversity. You don't have to. That's an erroneous assumption.
Yes.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
And we move mainly to inclusion. So the whole journey to having a workforce that reflected the communities they lived in, wherever we were in the world, had to do with a higher goal of inclusion, where everyone had the opportunity to be seen, heard, to participate, and to contribute their gifts. So by taking that journey, it ended up benefiting everyone. And we called our diversity valuing uniqueness. So it was with the widest lens. And so it benefited everyone. For instance, I remember when we finished our vision engagement process, we wanted to do a whole communication campaign. And we normally would go to, because we were a highly profitable company, so we would go to not Wall Street, New York, and get a marketing firm to do it. But because we had shifted that model and had really embraced value and uniqueness, someone came up with the idea, why don't you post this and see if someone has these skills inside the organization? And we by the way, we were looking for an illustrator. And we found him in the plant, assembling furniture in Georgia, in our plant in Georgia. We brought him up to corporate headquarters, and I mean, talk about win, 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 win. He was a white male, so I think everybody could see that when you go after what are your gifts? What are the gifts? And you make those decisions on competencies and gifts and inclusion. But you do not have to sacrifice that whatsoever. And it translates into we had a female, she was our highest performer and in the company. And she was pregnant, and she said, I'm sorry to tell you guys, I'm going to go part-time. And we just on the leadership team, we just said, oh my God, because we were just getting ready to give her a position to launch Herman Miller for the home. And so we went to her, and she had tried to talk her out of it, actually. and so she said, no, I'm going home, because she already had one child at home and she wanted to be home. And so we talked about it. We said, who said a vice president can't launch a business, a part-time vice president? I know it's unorthodox, but who said that can't happen? And so we made a deal with her and her leadership team, and they had all their meetings at her house. So what better environment, right? Because they're launching Herman Miller for the home, and they're doing it in a home that has children and da. So once again, not inheriting those old stereotypical structures and assumptions about people. And they launched Herman Miller for the home. They beat the schedule, they beat the budget, and they beat the quality specs.
Yeah, that's
that all grew out of the mindset of diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
And we started saying form followed function. So we don't have to inherit these structures that exclude people, or control people. But so that debate is going on right now, obviously, about diversity.
I think wisdom in your answer. There's some of the huge wisdom in your answer is, as you were speaking, the workers on the front line saying this as I was saying before, it's because they believe that the reason for what's happening and the quotas, etc., is purely because of how it looks for the share market. That's what their words are. That's the reason. Versus what you just said was quite simple on many levels. Is let's just reflect the community in which we live.
Well, and not lower our quality standards. There you'll be surprised, but that means that you have to challenge your basic assumptions about people, and you'll look at someone who's Black and make an assumption that they're not intelligent. Maybe their accent is different than yours, and we just have to challenge some of these things and have some dialogue. Dialogue is by the way, the technology, and so that runs through the red thread that runs through the process, getting people in teams to talk to one another authentically, and using dialogue, which means not conversation, as Peter Senge says. Conversations. I love my idea. I love you, and it's just clash, or I'm waiting for you to finish so I can tell you what I think. Dialogue, dialogus, means meaning runs through. And so what we're trying to accomplish, like the Native Americans and probably the natives and most indigenous people, it's a conversation that you speak and listen and open to, and you open up your assumptions, and you begin to come to shared understanding of what you're trying to do together. It's so powerful. It's powerful in families. It's powerful in relationships. It's powerful in communities, and the power, you've talked about this too, of storytelling.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
And with the dialogue, I mean, I feel so privileged to have been exposed to understanding and learning what dialogue was for me in the mid-1990s. Completely changed my life.
Yes.
Completely changed my life and my perspective on life. The challenge that I believe we have these days is that people are so used to turning everything into bite chunks and 1 minute or less, or 30 seconds. And people's desire to, if you tell them it's a whole day program, they're like, oh, a whole day. That's too much. Can you do it in an hour? Can you do it in 30 minutes? And we still, for dialogue to truly work, we actually have to slow down to be faster.
Without question. But I ease them in there, Gary. I let them experience what 1 hour feels like when you're asking the right questions. So you're asking a different set of questions, and they don't want that hour to end. And if you are asking first what matters to you most in life, and they're running from meeting to meeting, and they're like, what? And I have a huge customer that there's no way that they were going to do that, and 2 years later, one of the recommendations from the whole organization to leadership was leadership has accepted as time and space for dialogue, because they're global, and the way we organize them, every session had people from different countries. And so when they have a chance to tell their story, the first question is, by the way, what brought you here? Tell each other the defining moments in your life that brought you where you are here today. And then people get excited, and they start, you really, so the connections start forming, and then that second question, what matters to you most on this journey? And people start unzipping, because they're just like you and I. We want to share our story. We want to be heard. We want to be seen. We want to be cared, loved, and so, yeah, it's a different way of doing it. And I'm telling you, this organization has thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Oh, yeah, this is beautiful. You just gave me goosebumps. I love hearing that. Yeah, and this is happening right now, Michele, which is just beautiful. And just a few weeks ago, I facilitated with my daughter a session for a stair building company. And so they got their warehouse and they got their office. And when I was able to persuade the leadership that we would do 90 minutes, so I was able to get it from 60 to 90 minutes, but it would be a whole of staff. But they didn't have a room that was going to be big enough. So I just said, let's use the warehouse. Can we use the warehouse? Like, let's be in the workspace of where most of the workers actually do the work. But we'll just take out a whiteboard, no computers, no PowerPoints, just a whiteboard, can we get some round tables, have people sitting down there, and that the focus of that was around the culture of care. And what does care look like for us here?
Right.
And
Right.
and again, the owner of the business is there having conversations, like I call them strategic conversations. But the beauty is they're having conversations around questions of which they've never discussed before. And to have the owner of the business and the most recent apprentice who's joined the organization now having a conversation about what does care look like here. You get really clear, and B, the experience of people actually having a conversation like that, despite the hierarchy, is actually I can talk to anyone in the hierarchy, and that's okay because they're a human being too, and I'm a human being, and we can actually do that.
Right. Right. Yeah. I keep telling you, it always works. I mean, it's not me. It's essentially what is inside of people that's desperately trying to get out, because we inherited these artificial structures and we have been slaves to them. Leadership has been slaves to them, and they don't enable us to be all that we can be. And in fact, they tell us not to dream big and not to talk to one another. They put us in boxes and they tell us only these gifts that we write on the paper are the ones that you can contribute. So I partner with David Cooper Ryder because I integrate appreciative inquiry too, conceptually, because came to the point where I wholeheartedly agree with David that if you start with a negative question, you're going to spiral down. So it's strength-based, positive questions. Those questions we talked about, those are strength-based, what matters to you most, But he and I, and with some other facilitators, have brought as many as 1,500 people in together for 3 days. They're called summits, and most of those are cross sector. Like one was Blue City. Green City on a blue lake, which was Cleveland. They wanted to become much more environmentally responsible, and so he brought together everyone. He invited everyone, and they ended up with 1,500 representatives from across the city, and including students and children, business, government, grassroots, faith leaders, and ran the process. And they ran that came back together every year for 10 years, and they're doing some remarkable things on environmentally. I think they're the first city to have freshwater power plant in the lake. But you can look that up and see all of the results on. I think they've got a website, Green City on a blue lake, and so and there's more and more of those, by the way, because the boundaries are blurring, and you can't get anything done with business trying to do it by themselves, and education by themselves, and these institutions have to come together because they're interrelated, and the boundaries are blurring now.
Yeah.
And so the ability to do these large scale change things, and you have to bring cities together, communities together, and it's happening.
I remember in the year 2000. Did you ever meet Daniel Kim from Pegasus Communications and Systems?
Of course, yeah, yeah.
In the year 2000 in San Diego at the Systems Thinking and Action Conference, there was 1,500 delegates there, and we walk into the hall, and it's set up for a conversation cafe. This is my first experience of this.
Conversation cafe.
Daniel gets up and he explains what's going to happen. And honestly, the Aussie in me is sitting there thinking, there's no way 15 people are going to have a conversation together. Like, really, this isn't going to happen. within 10 minutes, my mind was completely shifted, and my mind went to, I've got to learn how to do this.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's dialogue.
Yeah.
This is my this is my Bible, David
Yes.
Bohm, on dialogue. And all of us at Herman Miller read this. And we brought Peter Senge in early at 1987, 88, to teach the seven of us on the top management team how to speak to one another, how to be in dialogue. And then we ended up bringing together the top 75 global leaders in groups of 25, because David Bohm says try to keep it 24, 25, and partner with the Aspen Institute for 3 days. So each group, we went through the whole 75, and with no agenda other than diversity, quality, and change. And so, and we had some pre-readings, but those pre-readings were from the classics to, like Socrates and all of that, to Confucius, to Martin Luther King, and to give us a backdrop of things within our consciousness as we went down that journey of dialogue. And that was part of the transformation that ended up with those phenomenal results.
Yeah, and look, again, I suppose, contrary to my statement earlier about people want things slower, one of the fastest growing podcasts in the world is by Stephen Bartlett, called The Diary of the CEO. And most of his interviews go for over 2 hours on YouTube. And yet it's the fastest growing, the second most popular podcast on YouTube. And
yeah, I need to look at that.
Yeah, the diary of the CEO. He's from the United Kingdom. He's 32 years of age. He's a person of color, extremely successful with the businesses that he's created over time. But yeah, fascinating conversations, fascinating guests. Talking about time, I know that you said to me before we even pressed record that you are busier than you've ever been in your entire life. And you've been busy throughout your entire life. So I'm going to put in the show notes now where folk can contact you, but they're going to probably struggle to get in with how full your book is at the moment. People should go and check out your book series on dream makers. I've certainly got it and highly recommend it for everyone. Folks, you heard it in the introduction, but Michele's one of my lifetime heroes. You have no idea how much of a privilege this is for me to have this opportunity to take far more of your time than I said I was going to take.
That's fun. I enjoyed this conversation, and I love the opportunity to talk about these things and to, hopefully catalyze a broader conversation that could ripple across the world. You asked me in the invitation to participate, is there one major message I might want to get across? And it's going to be radical. It's going to be bold, but I'm going to share it with you. And that is that I believe that we need to move to, transcend to, love being the core value and organizing principle for business and society. If we look at what we inherited, I'll say that again, it was based on hate, fear. I'd say fear more than hate, fear. And so everything's been designed around fear that people will take advantage, fear relates, when you think about how organizations are designed. Love is the strongest, most powerful, most effective force in the universe. And I wanted to read Albert Einstein's poem on that. Now, this was published in 1972. It's called the Einstein Papers. And the piece, this little paragraph, is "A Man of Many Parts," was published in the New York Times. And here's his quote: "A human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts, and his feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few people nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. And so imagine if that was our mission and we organized around liberating people, well, liberating the human spirit. Imagine what we could do. Well, and now is the time to do it because all bets are off. No institution, no one knows what the best design is. There's no, every institution is struggling with its own identity. So co-designing and co-creating with your people a beautiful journey that makes money, makes you feel good, lets you grow. Win, 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 win.
And that's exactly what we want. I mean, I've got my 5 children, you've got your daughter, and, I'm very, very conscious of not saying, I can't blame anyone else for the world that we live in because I've contributed to it. I'm 55. I've contributed to the world that we live in. So I want to continue to contribute in a way that's actually going to make the world a place where my children feel committed to contributing for the generations that are going to follow them, because that's what's been going on in human history for hundreds of thousands of years to us. We've got a duty to do that.
It's our right and our responsibility. You're absolutely correct.
No one else, so we might as well have a go. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, Michele, for giving me the honor of speaking with us and joining us on the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast. It's been an absolute privilege. Thank you for handling some of the technological challenges we had at the start of the interview.
No problem. Well, thank you, Gary, and it's been my pleasure. And thank you for your contribution to this global journey towards caring and compassion.
And you've given me some wisdom today to help right now improve the quality of my work, which is, I'm very, very grateful for that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye, Michele.
Bye-bye.